Have you ever heard tell of a man born incapable of a scream? Not from some shock, not from trauma, but from being born without a tongue, in a place where family bloodlines twisted back on themselves like a hangman's noose. Totaling 7, his hands had 3 fingers on the left, 4 on the right, every one of them curled inward, useless and shriveled. A name was something he never received. Only a nickname, uttered like a curse. The Craw. And if these words are reaching your ears, you've wandered off the edge of the known world, for this tale isn't found in any library. It survives in hushed tones, passed between the fragments of broken families in territories so abandoned the census takers gave up long ago. Deep in the folds of eastern Tennessee's hills, past where the telephone poles end and the reliable roads give out, a house once stood that seemed less constructed than violently expelled from the earth. It was there, in 1942, that the Craw first drew breath, within walls of decaying timber and among relatives who had lost all track of kinship. Some claim his mother was also his sister. Others insist she was no longer human, merely the final flicker of a sane mind in a clan being consumed by madness. He was never examined by a doctor. The town remained oblivious to his existence. But the holler knew. The holler listened. He made noises regardless, people insist. Guttural, wet sounds from deep in his throat, like a beast attempting to form words. And when they state he had no tongue, they don't mean it was removed. They mean it was never formed to begin with, just a smooth, pink slab of flesh where words should have lived. Like waterlogged twigs, his fingers were permanently bent. Yet his appearance wasn't what troubled the old women who discussed him. It was the profound silence that fell over the woods whenever he passed through. His life stretched on far longer than anyone predicted, perhaps unnaturally long. Long enough to witness every last member of his lineage either disappear or decay from within. Shame was a lesson no one taught him, yet he carried its burden like an iron weight stitched to his backbone. Now, you must understand, this was no simple campfire tale stitched together for a thrill. This was a real, breathing man. And the deeper you dig into his story, the clearer it becomes that his existence was an impossibility. The grandfather, they say, erected that house using only his bare hands and corroded nails, motivated not by pride but by a deep-seated paranoia. Every window was a narrow slit, every doorway built so low you had to bow your head to cross the threshold. That house was a prison, its design meant to keep prying eyes away and the family blood contained. Into this silence, the Craw was born. Yet he wasn't the only one. Others shared that space. 3 uncles, 2 aunts, a mother whose body aged at twice the normal rate. There were no birth certificates, no school records, just a family that consumed one another's memories until individual identities blurred and were lost. The neighbors, if such a term applies, would sometimes catch the sound of thick, guttural thumps echoing from the hills after dark, as if some large, hobbled thing was moving just beyond the tree line. A boy out hunting raccoons once stumbled upon a pile of bones laid out in a flawless spiral. Most were assumed to be from a goat, but one had a gold filling wedged tight in the tooth. No goat ever sported a gold filling. It was within this tangled web of confusion that the Craw transformed into something other. He never spoke, but his watching was constant, from shadowy corners, from behind the cover of trees. Children who strayed too near the border of the property would come back ashen and trembling, mumbling about a man whose eyes weren't blind, but simply empty, as if the sockets had imploded from disuse. But here was the peculiar part. Every witness described a different horror. Some vowed his mouth was a gash stretching from ear to ear. Others were certain he had no mouth whatsoever. Hallucinations, most likely, yet every single account concluded with the same chilling phrase, "I felt like I was being remembered." In 1967, a sheriff mounted an investigation, driving up the hill with 2 deputies and a sidearm filled with bravado. All that returned was the car, empty, its engine still purring. There was no evidence of a fight, just a single trail of footprints leading into the deep woods, with none leading back out. The official record states they deserted. But the sheriff's wife swore he had left his wallet behind, a thing he would never do. This is the trouble with stories of this nature, their edges fray, their facts distort. But if you have the patience to wait in the quiet, the truth eventually crawls back to the surface. It was following that disappearance that the people in town began using the term, the Craw, with a new gravity, not as a moniker, but as a title, a function handed down through the shadows, as if the man had not been born with his deformities, but had been selected for them. When the 1970s arrived, the house had imploded, as if the very earth had recoiled from what it harbored. The Craw, however, did not leave. Those brave or foolish enough to walk the edges of his land told of fleeting glimpses, mere flashes of a figure sitting perfectly still amidst the wreckage. No roof remained, no walls, just a man-shaped void you could barely make out through the trees. He never stirred. He never offered a wave, but the sensation was undeniable. That stare, like a cold nail being driven into your spine. Rumors, naturally, flourished. They said he subsisted on raw game, that he had mated with some other thing in the forest, that he was a living curse, a punishment for the family's accumulated sins. The local preacher declared him a demon wearing human skin. Proof, however, was non-existent. There was only fear, a quiet, pervasive dread that would make you cross yourself in an empty room, even if you'd never held a belief in your life. A 17-year-old girl once resolved to expose it all as superstition. With a Polaroid camera in hand, she crept up that hill in the full light of day. Her boyfriend idled at the bottom, his car's engine running. She never descended. A week afterward, the sheriff discovered her camera perched on a tree stump near the property line. A single photo had developed. It showed mostly forest, but there, in the far right corner, crouched low behind a collapsed beam, was something pale, nearly human, save for the fingers. They were long, and deeply wrong. The original was locked away in an evidence room, but copies of the image spread through the community like a secret. For the local teenage boys, it became a dark rite of passage: find the picture, stare into it, and see if it stares back into you. Some insisted the image was not static, that the figure slowly crept closer over time. That the shadows themselves would shift. A simple trick of the light, most likely, yet some would swear on their fathers' graves that the photograph would bleed if you touched it. One by one, people relocated. Families sold their ancestral plots for a pittance. The roads fell into disrepair, reclaimed by twisting roots and an absolute silence. By the 1980s, that entire sector of the county had been scrubbed from official maps. Not condemned, not restricted, merely erased. Despite this, hunters would still talk of seeing things. And sometimes, in the dead of night, you would hear it. A sound like wet paper being slowly torn apart. Not a voice, not any known animal, but something caught between the two. For the Craw did not die. He never departed. He merely entered a state of waiting. You would imagine a figure so malformed, so cut off from the world, half submerged in myth, would simply fade away without a sound. But in 1992, a construction crew, unaware of the history, desecrated that hill. A development plan had been approved in the distant state capital, but the blueprints were somehow confused. A private firm sent bulldozers carving a path toward the old property, intending to erect a cell tower. Within 2 days, 3 workers resigned without a word of explanation. One of them was discovered later that week, walking barefoot down a highway, his hands crammed with soil and every fingernail ripped from its bed. He never uttered another word. The project was terminated. The local authorities cited budget constraints, but the men who had climbed that slope would not speak of what they had witnessed, only that something remained alive up there, still moving, still watching. A welder among them scrawled a single, grease pencil line on the interior wall of his trailer: "He doesn't eat, he remembers." That same year, a journalist from Knoxville named Erin Molly attempted to write a feature on the story. The familiar angle, Appalachian decay, families left behind. She spoke with locals, absorbed the whispered lore, even managed to locate the girl's Polaroid. But she committed one critical error. She went up the hill alone. The last record of her was recovered from a melted cassette tape found in the glove compartment of her incinerated car. The engine was strangely untouched. There had been no collision, no blast, only an intense, isolated fire. Experts called it spontaneous combustion, but if you listen to that tape, you can perceive it. Her trembling voice, the moan of the wind, and beneath it all, almost too faint to hear, a scratching. Not an animal's claw, but like bones scraping against bark. Then, a void of sound, followed by something moist, a breathing presence, wordless, but undeniably there. The recording concludes with Aaron's gasp, a final, whispered phrase, "His mouth is open, but there's nothing inside." The fire marshal never completed a formal report. Her ashes were interred, and within a month, Aaron's name had vanished from her newsroom. Her family ceased mentioning her. Friends deleted her photographs. It was as though she had never drawn breath. You see, that is the Craw's true nature. He doesn't merely terminate lives. He severs connections. Memory, history, language, they all come undone in his proximity, like a rope submerged in acid. And if you are still listening, your courage already surpasses that of most. Share in the comments what path you would have chosen, had this been your lineage. For if you dig far enough into your own ancestry, you might just uncover earth that was never meant to be disturbed. He was the last of his line, some will tell you. That when that bloodline coiled inward for the final time, it yielded a thing that was no longer human, yet not any other recognizable entity. The Craw was less a person and more a manifested consequence, a sentence that learned to walk. Yet one account persists among the eldest residents. It is told a single time, and then never repeated. It originates from a nurse, now an old woman, who worked the night shift at a long-term care facility 3 counties away. In 2004, they admitted a patient delivered by 2 silent men bearing government identification. He had no name, no paperwork, no insurance. The instruction was straightforward: keep him comfortable. The man, she recounted, was small and stooped, his limbs stunted, his fingers coiled like desiccated worms. He possessed no tongue, no teeth, no vocal cords. Yet he moved with a purpose, not at random, but slowly, deliberately, as if every gesture was laden with the accumulated memory of generations. And then there was his knowledge. He would position himself by the window and, with unerring precision, turn his head at 3:17 a.m., night after night, for weeks, until the moment a patient in the adjacent room died. At 3:17, exactly. With his fingers, he would trace designs on the walls. Always spirals. The cleaning crew would paint over them each morning, and each following night they would reappear, a little larger, a little more deeply gouged. By the 3rd week, the paint had started to bubble. The nurse once sat with him during a powerful storm. The power was out, only the thunder remained. And in that darkness, she was certain he was listening to the flow of her thoughts. Her most deeply buried childhood shames, her fears and guilts, rose to the surface without her consent, until she felt she was suffocating. He simply sat, blinking, drawing breath through the hollow where his tongue ought to have been. When she finally managed to stammer, "What are you?" he slowly raised his hand and tapped the window. 3 times. Outside stood a tree, lifeless, cloven in 2 by a lightning strike. By morning, he had vanished. There was no discharge paperwork, no digital footprint. The room was sterile, the bed stripped, the spirals gone, erasing all proof he was ever there. But she held on to one piece of evidence, the pillowcase, a soft flannel sheet, bearing a bloodstain. It didn't come from a cut, its shape was unmistakably that of a hand. A hand with 7 fingers. From that day to this, she refuses to speak of the mountains. She will not so much as glance at a map. For some entities do not simply perish, they bide their time. One might assume that folklore withers and dies with the passing years. But in places like this, in the gaunt ridges and emptied veins of Appalachia, it doesn't die. It festers.